It's good to see you. All right. Let's finish up Buddhism tonight and then go into Taoism and Confucianism. Hopefully we can do all three of them.
Oh, I thought of a question.
Please.
You made a comment, kind of an aside. You said, well, in this day and age, as I understood you, you said Buddhism is like sour grapes. Use the expression sour grapes.
I don't really remember the context.
Okay.
A phrase by itself is really quite unimportant and meaningless if the context is not available.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Remark came out of it.
Yeah, imagine for a moment someone, let's say my boss, opened the door and you said the word F-U-C-K and you screamed it. And he doesn't know what the context is. Maybe you were mugged before coming to class. Maybe you saw the sunrise or the sunset this morning. Maybe you ran into a beautiful car. And it's an expression that is not vulgar at all. It's really one of awe and mystery and appreciation. So without the proper context, it's really difficult to okay. So let's continue with our miserable story from last night, and then we'll hopefully finish it up, and we'll move on to something less interesting, Taoism. Sounds okay? Okay. So for those of you who weren't here last night, a brief recap. And for those of you who were here last night, probably have forgotten, so a recap for you would also be good and beneficial. So a man who finds physical life relatively uneventful has a lot of entertainment. But as Socrates would say, beware of a busy life. Because really, when you look at it closely, it's quite empty and hollow and meaningless on the inside. And lucky for us, really, that this man grew rather tired of physical life and all the pleasures therein. Unlike many of us in this class, there are moments we ask ourselves, is there anything more to life? Is it really just waking up early, going to school, going to work, coming home, making some food, and passing out and doing the same thing over again? Is that it? It's such a condemnation. And so he wanted to understand why it is that human beings eventually are so unhappy. And certainly the social life, the political life doesn't make anyone quite satisfied. So luckily for us, he leaves society, he leaves his friends, he leaves his wife, he leaves his son for the forest. In the forest, he becomes religious, like many of us in this class. You take up yoga, you begin to go to church and read the Bible. You sit and meditate in hopes of having an experience, having an understanding, but the Buddha came to realize that he's really not after experiences. He doesn't want to pass time by getting himself into what we call spiritual pleasures, only to have them pass by, and just he's left with a vague memory. And then you're haunted by the memory because you want whatever kind of pleasure you've had, you want it to be repeated. And then you long for the experience to be repeated, and all of a sudden you realize you're no longer really after understanding, you just want pleasure to be continued. And so he fasts, and he comes to realize you can't really get anything from fasting. There are these Japanese monks who visit the forest for about 13, 14 days. They don't eat and they don't sleep. And when you put so much stress on your body, it begins to hallucinate. And in their hallucination, they begin to have visions. And so once they have these visions, they kind of come back home with the assumption that the gods really like them and the gods have sent them messages and now they're enlightened. Okay, that's not what the Buddha wanted. He didn't want a vision. He wanted sobriety. He wanted to understand. You know, it's like you are having a disagreement with your companion and he says, let's go on a trip to pacify you. And you say, I don't really want to be pacified. I don't mind going on a trip, but I like to understand our issue before going on a trip. And that's what the Buddha says, that before going back to life, I want to understand why life is so meaningless, so hollow from the inside. And so he goes through these stages and eventually has a breakthrough. In the breakthrough, he has this thing called understanding. Okay? Now, the difficulty with Buddha's understanding is he needs to come out now. He needs to come out whatever world he lives in. And when he comes out, he comes and sits amongst the regular people, common people like you and I. Now, how does the Buddha explain life to us? Okay. Is he a philosopher, using language or words or concepts that are far too abstract, foreign to us? I remember my brother is a really highly intellectual sort of a fellow. And so in his 20s, he had bought these cards from some store. And there were these fancy words, you know. I don't know if you, but it's not in your time. Our time, it was like some sort of like a cliff note, you know. You would buy a box, 500 cards. On each card, there is like this huge word. I don't even know if I have any in my vocabulary. Like voluptuous. You know, you just say someone is attractive. But no, that's not my brother. He wanted to say something like rather unique. So he would go to interviews and he would use these words. And then the committee would look at him and say, you know, we didn't really understand anything that you said. Okay? I have no doubt sometimes if you kind of just turn on the TV and go to these YouTube gurus, they'll use words like egos and consciousness and unconscious and at peace or Sabbath or one of those things. Well, I've heard all these before. What the hell do they mean? So you have to understand the nice thing about this kid, the Buddha, at the age of 40 or 29 or whatever the age they say he was when he became enlightened, he used really a sort of language that you and I can understand and relate to. So, and he kind of titled them the Four Noble Truths. And the first one is this. The truth is, I came to class in a relatively good mood. I'm sure that, like last night, I'll go home in a relatively passive and sorrowful mood, because that's what these ideas are all about for the most part. That's how they impact you. The first wisdom that the Buddha shares with us is the following. Life is a very, very, very profoundly miserable experience. It's filled with sadness. It's filled with sorrow. And the reason is, all of us in this class so desperately seek security. Security in writing an essay in hopes of getting an A or even passing the class. Security in getting on a plane and making sure that it doesn't explode. Security that our marriages don't fall apart. Security that our kids don't end up in prison. When we walk, I don't know if you guys remember 1986, when there was this huge earthquake in the Bay Area, that the earth opened up and just swallowed things. I remember I had a friend, she had MS in San Francisco many, many years ago, about 30 years ago, as we were walking. For those of you who may not know what MS is, it attacks your immune system and messages get delayed. Sometimes they don't get to the proper neurons. So I remember walking with a friend of mine, and as she was taking another step, all of a sudden she fell to the ground because her brain didn't register that one leg is moving forward. So, you know, give whatever message you need to the leg. And so she just fell to the ground. And so you couldn't even really trust your body anymore. So when there is no security, you realize you live in a world of impermanence. There was a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, I think, who said that you can't really put your foot in the river, same river twice, because the river is constantly changing. And consider for a moment the marriage vows that we have. Consider all the promises we make. The assumption is there is something permanent about us, something unchanging about us. And the truth is that's never the case. And it is such a disappointment because we move in every relationship with a good amount of physical, emotional, intellectual investment, hoping that we'll reap the benefit. Hello. We'll reap the benefit, but what the Buddha is saying, there's a good chance that you can make all these investments and get nothing in return. There was a book that was written by P.D. Auspensky, a student of Gurdjieff, a Russian-Armenian philosopher. He wrote this book called The Strange Life of Ivan Osakin. And there is a passage in the book where the magician tells the seeker after truth that, listen, you have to understand that you may be on this path and you may have all these hopes, all these dreams that this path will eventually lead you somewhere. And the truth is, it may not lead you anywhere. You come empty-handed and you may leave empty-handed. It's like a man who works really hard to marry this guy's daughter, and he works hard for 7 years, and the father gives him his daughter. And then he looks at the father and says, well, this is not the girl I want this other girl. And the father looks at him and says, well, you have to work another 7 years. And he does. And just as he's about to get married to this girl that he wants, the girl dies. So the point I'm trying to make is that it matters very little where we go in life. Disappointment is always waiting for us because there is really no permanence, no security in anything. And what happens when you don't find security in anything? You're bound to be disappointed. And in disappointment, there is sadness, there is frustration, there is suffering, there is pain. It impacts the way you look at yourself. It impacts the way you look at other people. You begin to lose your faith and trust. You get really, really, really depressed. I mean, you have to consider for a moment, why is it that so many people love talking about Buddhism? So many people desire to be his followers when his philosophy is nothing but sadness. It's such a bleak and dark philosophy and way of looking at life, really. Okay? So, and then there is this other idea that he has that makes life extremely, extremely miserable. Remember, so the first one is that there is no security or permanence in life. The second is there's always going to be disappointment. And the third, which is really, really quite devastating, is we have a self, or at least we assume that we have a self. The past 10, 15 years, sometimes I stand in front of the mirror and I realize I have been in this body with this body, which is very familiar to me for the past 57 years. And then all of a sudden, as I look myself in the mirror and say, maybe the Buddha was right, maybe he's wrong, I don't really know. But I am so attached to the way I look. When I see my wrinkles, it worries me. When I limp, it worries me. Being attached to your body, when in fact, not even your body gives you security. It really eventually is a vehicle for a great amount of disappointment. Forgive me, Karen. Sometimes she just stands because sitting on these chairs when you happen to be a little older, it's really difficult and tough on your body. It's a body that has been carrying you around for the past 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And all of a sudden, it's no longer dependable. Okay. Now, add to it the fact that most of us in this class, my father is about 90. And my brother and my brother-in-law, when we talk once in a while, even my sister, they say to me that, they're much more closer to my dad physically because they all live in Roseville. Says, Dad is getting really slow. He's beginning to forget things. that you come to a point where your brain in your body or your mind in your body can no longer really store memories, can no longer express the memories. It begins to forget. I had a student long time ago. His name was Andrew. In this classroom, one day he comes to me and he says, they put my father in a nursing home. Why? He no longer remembers any of us. We know who he is. We remember him because we're so young, but he remembers none of us. And then add to it the fact that inside this body, I have placed this body, as many of you have in this class, in a variety of different physical locations. And every physical location creates its own set of energies, emotional energies, physical energies, intellectual energies, and it moves you. It shapes you. It gives you experiences. My emotions are connected to my social and physical environment. I can't even claim them to be my own. I assure you, if I didn't have parents who are really, for the most part, great saints, if I had a father who was an alcoholic, if I had a mother who was a drug addict, I have no idea what sort of emotions would have lived inside me. I am nothing but a product of a certain set of accidents, and I had no hand in any of their creation. For those of you who've seen the movie The Matrix, the first one, there comes a scene where Morpheus looks at Thomas Anderson, and they are in the construct. And the construct happens to be white. It's, tabula rasa, the blank slate. And little by little, things begin to kind of darken this white background. And after some sermons given to Neo by Morpheus, he says to him, human beings ultimately are reduced to a Duracell battery. And it's something that Karl Marx alluded to. No one really cares who you are anymore. No one cares about your emotions. No one cares about your history. No one really cares about the richness of your, ethnic and cultural background. The truth is you are a Duracell battery. You're going to be used by all sorts of people, and once they're satisfied, you're tossed aside. But the point I'm trying to make is this devastating idea that one of the reasons why we suffer is that we relate to ourselves as a physical body that houses emotions, that houses memories, that houses history. And the Buddha says that's the problem. Physically you lay next to another, and then you become physically attached, you become emotionally attached, you become mentally attached. And in attachment, you expect. And when you expect, you forget one main rule in life. There is never security. And when the guy doesn't call you back, when the gal doesn't call you back, when you don't get your paycheck, all of a sudden, what happens? You throw a temper tantrum. Remember what I shared with you last night. Should you understand Buddhism really, really well, I'm not talking the Buddhism that the Dalai Lama talks about. I'm not talking about the Buddhism that Thurman talks about. You sitting somewhere, reading the Four Noble Truths over and over and over again for many, 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 many years, where you can unpack and decode them for yourself. Okay? So, and his philosophy, which is really a remedy to this disease called life, is, if you want to look at it as a medicine, it's really so difficult to take. How could any one of us in this class walk around knowing full well that there is no security in anything? Your friendships, your promises, the promises other people make to you, your marriage, your children. How could you even trust yourself, really? Is there anywhere in life you can go where you don't suffer disappointment? And last, what the hell do you do if you don't look at yourself as a physical entity that houses emotions and thoughts? Are those good?
Well, I don't know, I haven't been into this one, but these are. They're good.
So, why is it that ultimately life is a tragic experience? We desire. Later on, of course, we'll talk about having the right desires. Either way, you suffer in life, that's given. But perhaps having the right desires will lessen your suffering a little bit. What is it that you and I desire? Again, go back to the way we divide the human being, or we create different stories in the human being. You and I have physical desires, and therefore physical hopes and dreams and attachments. We also have emotional desires, hopes and dreams. We also have psychological desires. And by psychological, I mean those of us in this class who have had some major life-changing events where we want to get rid of them, when they haunt us, when they bother us, when we want them to be repeated, when we want to understand them. And whenever you do that, you're associating yourself for the most part to a physical body that has certain experiences happen to it, you see. Then there are intellectual desires that perhaps you've signed up for this class because, as Karen would say, you're here because you want to know the history behind each religion. And when you have an instructor such as myself, who doesn't give you those information, you kind of walk away from the class profoundly disappointed, saying, I signed up for this class to figure out where Islam came from, how it came about, who are its founders, its theology, the founders of its theology and philosophy, do you see? And when she doesn't get those information, she walks away disappointed. And then there is, of course, spiritual desires. Some years ago, I had a friend. He had fallen in love with this girl, and he sat up one night and he prayed and he fasted for a couple of days because she wouldn't return his call. And then he just kind of fell asleep on the prayer rug. He was a Muslim. And he called me at 4 a.m, telling me that he had this beautiful dream of all these saints and prophets, sitting with him and talking to him. And he was like high, from this dream for about 2-3 weeks. And then time passed and we sat and he said, Amir, I really miss having another beautiful dream where I can kind of live outside my body, to live an inspired couple of weeks. I don't know what to do. So what he did out of desperation, he had a spiritual desire, So he fasted for a couple of days. And he prayed, and then he manipulated his body and his psyche to fall asleep on the prayer rug. And he woke up, but there was no dream. And he was very, very disappointed. He felt as if God had abandoned him, God had forgotten him. And that is what we call a spiritual desire. Now, the difference between the first and the second one is that he really wasn't looking for a dream. He wasn't really looking for a spiritual experience. He simply longed to be with the person that he was in love with, you see. And in its place, of course, God revealed certain parts of himself or herself or itself to this kid. In the second scenario, he had to manipulate his psyche. His intentions were wrong. And that's why no dreams were given to him. And he suffered because of it. Okay. So remember, just because someone says, I'm on a spiritual quest, don't believe them. In fact, don't trust them. In fact, laugh at them. In fact, hit them and run. Okay. Now, I was just joking, but if you do decide to hit them gently. Now, some of the stuff, of course, is a repeat, and I do it on purpose because I know how forgetful all of us are. So remember how desires come about. First, one of your five senses are activated because you see, you touch, you taste, as Karen did with the cookie, something that's attractive, that's delicious. And greed, one of the seven deadly sins, enter. And then you begin to covet. I want more. Then you lust. I want more. I want more. And as you keep saying, I want more, the attraction turns into interest. And as lust, becomes more blossomed, as greed becomes more blossomed, as covetousness becomes more blossomed, it turns into a want. It occupies more brain space. You begin to imagine more of, I wonder if I can just go up there and grab some more cookies. I wonder if I can walk and Amir is not going to embarrass me in front of all these people, you see. And then the want will turn into a need. And remember, whenever you have a need, it's because you yourself have nourished it. It doesn't happen accidentally. This is a beautiful science. It's not given to you by God, do you see? It's not given to you by your parents. You yourself keep nourishing it through your imagination. And imagination is nothing but seeing yourself with the object of your desire in the future. Okay? You're going out with Jacqueline, or you're going out with Saeed, or Majid, or Astar, or anybody. Okay? You become attracted to him. Then you become interested in him. Then you want him. Then you need him. Now you have an emotional relationship. And what you do is you picture yourself 2 weeks from now where he is bending. He's sitting on his knees and he's asking you, will you marry me? Okay? So remember, most of the things that you and I need in life is because of our own imagination very much at play. Okay? Now, and remember, I'm not talking about the basic needs. Okay? Where most of us are governed by, to some extent, social forces. So, imagine if the Buddha had died after only sharing two noble truths. That life is miserable, it's sorrowful, it's tragic, it's filled with suffering. Disappointment is everywhere. Insecurity is everywhere. And just in case you trust who you are, just wait. You will change. Your desires will change. Your wants and needs will change. And for those of us in this class who have some age in us, we will tell you, if you like a kid who is only 18, just wait. When you're 25 or 30, you will look back with a good amount of disgust. Don't commit. Don't say yes. Okay? Now, and so he says, for example, that, life is suffering because of desires and attachments. And then he died. What do you think would happen to Buddhism? Would there be a remedy at all, a way out? As Jean-Paul Sartre would say, perhaps Buddhist philosophers would create a play very much in the same vein as Jean-Paul Sartre, No Exit. Other people are hell. That we live in an environment where we can't trust ourselves and we can't trust anyone else. But luckily for us, after telling us that life is a sick, miserable, tragic event, he tells us, before you kill yourself, let me tell you, there is a way out. And then you ask, well, what is it? It's an 8-step program. If you have had any friends or you yourself have kind of played with alcohol to the point where you've become addicted to it, you go through a 12-step program, and that's only for alcohol. Buddha says if you want life to never, ever, ever sicken you, to never touch you the way it does today, if you don't want to suffer as much, be disappointed as much, I have an 8-step program. It's very simple, 8 steps. The truth is it's 9 steps. Okay, now, let me kind of unpack the stuff for you very, very quickly, and then we'll move on. Just in case you read books on Buddhism or YouTube, people who talk of Buddhism, I'm going to approach it a little different because I'm a man. My ego is quite huge, and I think everybody else is wrong except me. And I'm going to believe that and claim that they are wrong, including the Dalai Lama, and I am right. Okay? And just in case some of you were not here last night, let me just tell you why the Dalai Lama is wrong, period. And again, for those of you who are here, forgive me for repeating myself again. It is important that you get this. If you want to go on a spiritual path, make sure you don't have a history that's traumatic. You've made peace with your father and your mother. Okay? Make sure that you don't have financial insecurities, that you're not running away because you don't have bread to eat or a shelter to place your body to protect it from the elements. Okay? Make sure that you are married. If not married, at least you have great friendships. That you don't walk into the spiritual path because you're just lonely. Make sure that you've had a great amount of rich meaning to your life. That you have grown, matured intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, where you've come to realize you were promised marriage. You got married. You were a great wife or a husband, but life revealed to you that it's just not enough for you. That you had children. You were a great mother or a great father, but it simply wasn't enough for you. That you adore your parents, but you want someone to nourish your spirits, your emotions. You're grateful for the fact that your parents gave you the basic needs, food, shelter, and clothing. But you're at a stage where these are your parents no more because your needs are different. That you have lived in society in a very, very healthy way, only to realize society is not as great as it's cracked up to be. Have money to come to realize it makes you poor. Have relationships only to realize it makes you poor. Walk away from life with this understanding, with this experience. Okay? Yeah.
In this statement, though, you're still expressing the spiritual path as a want. You can say that that's.
Yes, you must have the right desires.
But in the previous, you just mentioned the story of your student or your friend with the dream. They had a spiritual experience, but then went to revisit that spiritual experience out of desire.
Right.
So, in that, could you argue that's the same intention? So then, what would you call the difference between want
Good.
versus a spiritual call?
That's a really, really good question. And so, the first step of the 9 that I'll share with you is called having the right intentions. The problem with intentions is that it exists inside you at different stages of life. Let me give you an example. Imagine you go to Pete's Coffee and you run into a guy, let's call him Joe, and you like him. and you have no intentions to hurt him. You are committed. You want to be with him. Okay? But you're 21. Your intention was to be with this man. But as time passes, as conflicts between the two of you grow, as disagreements grow, as you come to realize you come from different backgrounds in life, you have different interests, you want to be different people at different times, you realize all of a sudden your intentions begin to change. And now you revisit the relationship and say, I am sorry, I didn't mean to lead you on. I didn't mean to have you fall in love with me. The truth is, I just no longer feel as if I can be in this relationship. Now your intentions have changed. And what the problem with most of the Buddhist philosophers is that they just say, have the right intentions. Well, that's great. It's one thing to have the right intention at the age of 18 and having the right intention at the age of 45. At 45, you are seasoned, hopefully. You're mature. When you say to someone, I want to marry you, right? You're at a place where you say, in health and in sickness, I am never going to leave you. Let me give you an example. There was a woman a long time ago, and she was engaged to be married with this guy for about 5 or 6 years. Things happen and it doesn't work out. And she goes into seclusion. And she says, it seems like all the guys I run into, or all the guys I choose, are just bad for me. So she sits down for the next 3 years and she creates a list of qualities she's looking for in a man. And she changes her phone number. She disconnects herself from all of her friends except one. And she tells this friend, should you find any man with these qualities, tell him to call me. So about 4 years pass by, the friend calls and says, I think I have found someone. They go out to dinner. And she doesn't know this, but this young man, also has a list. Okay? So as they're sitting and talking, they're just checking off the boxes. They get married after 6 weeks. Okay? One day, this young woman gets up and she's not feeling well. They go to the hospital. The doctor says she has MS. And I don't know how familiar you are with MS. Okay? It's really basically a disease that ultimately paralyzes you and kills you. Okay? But you have to take a lot of medication. And in taking the medication, your just entire body begins to change. Okay? She couldn't walk. She couldn't clean herself. She couldn't bathe herself. She couldn't do anything. And yet the man didn't leave her. And then one day in the bathtub, as he is washing her, she looks at him and she says, I am really, really sorry. And he looks at her and she says, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. He has this intention. That intention remains the same throughout the relationship. It never changes. Okay? So when you go to the Buddha and say, my name is Lena, I am here to be your disciple. Well, your intentions are great, but you haven't yet been tested. And because you haven't been tested, your intentions are not trustworthy to the Buddha or to yourself. Now remember, one of the 7 deadly sins that exist in Christianity is called pride. Okay? All of us in this class, including myself, above and beyond everyone else, I have a huge, huge ego inside me. Okay? When I say to the Buddha, I want to be your student, I assume that I truly am ready to be a student. Okay? Now remember, if you were Socrates, you would say, an unexamined intentions is not worth having intentions. It's not valuable. Okay? So when, for example, you talk about intentions, there is the intentions at the novice level, okay? Intentions at the medium level, and intentions at the professional level. And these are all 3 different areas. A novice, you could never trust. They could always go back. Okay? Someone who's in the middle ground, purgatory, there's a good amount of conflict, yes and no's. Okay? And they usually kind of go back to their old life because of responsibilities and obligations, usually fueled by guilt. And then there is the professional ones, where they have really been seasoned to understand that there is nothing in life worth pursuing. And their intentions remain the same. One of the best, I think, books that, or accounts of the world of intentionality that you would want to read, at least the one that I am familiar with, is called Daughter of Five. We've talked about this book before. It's about a 50-year-old woman. You know, no one talks about the 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old going on a spiritual quest. It's about a 50-year-old woman who divorced once. Her second husband died. She had a good amount of religious fervor inside her. And her friend says, there's a guy in India who may understand what you're going through. And she goes there. And, you know, she goes there with the assumption that I know what the spiritual path is all about. I'm going to sit and do yoga. I'm going to sit, close my eyes and do Om Rama Rama Krishna. Okay? And she goes there, and after 2 weeks, and this is the thing, she's at the right place, being at the right place, she runs into this fellow, and there is something between them. There has to be mutual attraction. That this man needs to look at this woman and say, I'm attracted to her. And this woman needs to look at this man, the teacher, and say, I'm attracted to him. Okay?